On the surface level, the continent of Africa would be popularly known for its incredible and vibrant population, its large deposits of natural resources like gold, crude oil, and cocoa, its variety of exquisite cuisines, and the vast array of cultural heritage within the continent. But taking a deep look at the inside of the continent reveals a highly disturbing and troubling trend. A recent trend that, if continued, could set the development of this continent back decades and could lead to various unwarranted wars. The recent trend of coup d'etat. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from Misfortune. We're going to be taking a deep dive into the rising trend of coup within Africa, and more particularly West Africa, exploring the many implications this could have on both the continent and the entire world in general. For many of us who might not know, a coup, or coup d'etat in full, is simply the illegal and unlawful use of force by the military or any civilian to usurp a present democratic or military government in power. And for many decades in Africa and West Africa, this unlawful act was seen as normalcy. Many coups are often caused by political instability and corruption by the present government in power. And for Africa, especially in the years following many countries' independence in the mid-20th century, this was the case. The vacuum left by the colonial masters in Africa meant that countries and governments were largely unstable, unprepared, or incapable of performing their governmental responsibilities. And this meant that wave after wave of military takeovers swept across the continent. The majority of these coups took place in the western region of Africa, with Ghana and her leader at the time, Kwame Nkrumah, suffering the region's first ever major coup d'etat in 1966. Kwame Nkrumah was at the time one of the most influential men in the continent. He was a highly charismatic leader and had played a monumental role in Africa's independence movement, which led to Ghana being the first sub-Saharan country to gain independence in 1957. Regardless of his charismatic personality, his rule was characterized by economic stagnation in Ghana, and eventually the military decided that it was time for them to take over power. Even though this wasn't the first coup in all of Africa, it could be said that this had the biggest impact as it paved the way for many others to follow. Following this takeover by the military in Ghana, the western region of Africa witnessed a barrage of coups in the coming years and decades. Nigeria witnessed 6 successful coups d'etats between 1960 and 1999, with some other unsuccessful attempts. Burkina Faso had 6 successful coups between 1966 and 1990, and Sierra Leone had 5 successful coup attempts within that same timeframe. These 30 years were practically characterized by a coup attempt every other year in the West African region, with the military practically seizing political power at will. But after 1999, there was a steep decline in the number of coups that plagued Africa. Some sense of political and economic stability was beginning to creep into the continent. Democracy was beginning to be a mainstay. And as such, military interference in politics suffered a major hit. But as we've come to learn in recent years, is that if the root causes aren't addressed, the same consequences are likely to resurface. And after 24 years of relative peace, West African nations seem to be heading back to their old ways of military rule. Step forward, Mali. After decades of civilian rule in the country, the Mali military staged a coup to upstage the civilian government, under the guise that the government was entrenched in corruption, mismanagement of funds, and insecurity issues within the country. The result of the coup eventually led to Mali suffering various sanctions from regional and international bodies, like the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States. But the seed had already been sown in the hearts of many military personnel across West Africa. If they can usurp their civilian government, so can we, they must have thought. And before long, West Africa witnessed another coup, this time in the country of Guinea. The Republic of Guinea had been ruled by Alpha Condé for over a decade, with the length of his rule causing discontent among many Guinean citizens. Eventually, the military had had enough and decided to take matters into their own hands, and by doing so, overthrowing the Guinean president. After over 20 years of inactivity on the part of the military with respect to political power, 2 democratic governments had been upstaged in less than a year. And 4 months later, Burkina Faso became the next country to fall victim to yet another coup. After a military team headed by 34-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré stormed and seized the military base in the capital and detained the former president Roch Marc Christian Kabore, this meant that there were a total of 6 coup attempts in Africa between 2021 and 2022, and now to the most recent and most volatile military takeover of all, the Republic of Niger. This coup saw the former Niger president, Mohamed Bazoum, being detained by the Presidential Guard, and its leader, Abdourahmane Tiani, proclaiming himself the leader of a new military junta. But unlike other coups of recent years, this one might very well be the most volatile of all, and not just because of Niger, but the international ramifications that are surrounding this military action, with major world powers projected to suffer massively from it. France has taken center stage, with the country known for being a major dependent on Niger's primary export, uranium. In fact, over the last 10 years, Niger's uranium accounts for 20% of France's total uranium import, which is the natural resource used for powering France's nuclear plants. So it shouldn't come as much as a surprise that following the coup and the eventual suspension of exports of uranium into France, there appears to be growing discontent within French ranks, regardless of recent attempts by the Foreign Ministry Affairs spokesperson, who downplayed the situation. But this is where things get interesting, with Russia being a major player in the nuclear power market and a major user of uranium to sustain their nuclear endeavors. Having France and the rest of the European Union weakened by suspending the supply of uranium could indicate a larger strategy at play. By weakening opposition countries, Russia could inadvertently have an advantage in the event of a war. Because Russia aren't members of the European Union, sanctions on the exportation of uranium from Niger would not apply to them. Another major damning implication of the Niger coup is the presence of the natural gas pipeline that runs within it. Starting from Nigeria and flowing through Niger and Algeria into various countries in Europe, this pipeline is the longest in Africa, with a projected length of over 4,000 kilometers and estimated to discharge 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year. But the Niger coup has thrown such plans into tatters, with the new military junta not receptive to the idea of having the pipeline passing through their country. This has further thrown major European and international countries in a tight spot following the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which could adversely affect the supply of natural gas in European countries. And by implication, military retaliation from opposition countries and forces is becoming increasingly likely. The Economic Community of West African States, headed by the Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has already deployed standby forces to be on the ready against a possible invasion into the Republic of Niger, despite the Nigerian Senate rejecting such a proposal. And with attempts of open dialogue being repeatedly turned down by the junta, ECOWAS seems poised to take matters into their hands. But on the flip side, the Niger junta are far from alone in their resistance to keep absolute power of the state, with military-ruled states within Western Africa like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea openly declaring their support for the Niger junta. And if things couldn't get cataclysmic enough, Wagner Group, a Russian privately funded military company controlled by Yevgeny Prigozhin, has reportedly reached an agreement with the military junta in Niger for their support in case of a possible invasion from ECOWAS or any other opposing bodies. With each passing day, it is becoming more and more likely that a war could be breaking out within the West African region, and given the powerful parties in play here, this war could be Africa's most catastrophic one yet. But following on from over a decade of relative peace within the continent, how has Africa and West Africa managed to find herself in this position yet again? Well, the honest truth is that this recent trend of coups was only a matter of time before resurfacing again. Taking into account countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger, you'll find that the same political issues and insecurity concerns plague the above 4 countries. The same could be said to apply to a host of other African and West African countries. On one side, the age-old problem of corruption and government embezzlement of public funds still looms large across most African nations, with at least 4 African countries occupying spots in the top 10 most corrupt countries in the world, and a host of other African nations occupying spots in the top 20. This is highly exemplified by the Niger Coup. For over 2 years, there have been grumblings within Niger on the validity of former President Bazoum's legitimacy as president. The widespread reports of electoral malpractice on his run to winning the presidency, as well as the rampant corruption that continually plagued his brief tenure, were major drivers behind the military junta seeking to upstage him from power. Inadvertently, an uprising was always on the cards. There is also the wide-range problem of insecurity and the high poverty level. Africa plays host to some of the world's poorest countries, as well as boasting an extremely high insecurity level. This weakens governmental institutions as well as causing a fertile ground for coups to occur within Africa. Countries like Mali and Burkina Faso have been almost engulfed by terrorism and rampant insecurity for many years, up until the point that a military takeover was largely inevitable. The sad truth for many African citizens is that this recent trend has been a long time coming. Africa's gaping insecurity issues, political instability, and high corruption level has played a part in where the continent is at the moment. And if drastic and radical changes aren't made in the coming months and years, there might be even more coups on the horizon. And make sure to click that like and subscribe button. See you soon!